This clip is sponsored by Med Travelers. If you're an SLP interested in travel therapy, visit medtravelers.com to get started. We inherit caseloads and, we're going through and you can start to see, wow, this goal is just changed by a percentage for the last 5 years. It's like, why are we even doing this? And so if an SLP has students on their caseload that they're looking and saying, gosh, they really aren't appropriate for this, starts to dig in deeper, realize they probably shouldn't be receiving services anymore. What do you recommend for how, and you already touched on, how to kind of have those conversations, but exiting these students. And then, sometimes when we do have to have this standardized test score, those aren't, the self isn't going to be our friend in this area. It's not going to help. So how do you go about doing that when you say, I know they're not appropriate to be here anymore. They're not going to be, this is not an academic issue. They need to be off. How do you exit them? Or what data do you use for that?
Right. So I really am grateful for my experience in grad school because we were taught all about dynamic assessment. So yes, we use standardized assessment, but we use other information as well. So I'll use the standardized assessment, I'll use the self, I'll use the Goldman-Fristow and get that information. And from that information, especially on the Goldman-Fristow, I will compare to the way that they speak, to the dialect that I know that they are speaking, and if it follows the rules. So for me, I have different tools that I use to compare. So I created a AAE reference sheet that has a bunch of characteristics, whether it's from language, morphology, just different grammatical differences, articulation differences that are just all on this reference sheet that I can go into and show them in the meeting and say, this is what they produce and this is the rule that it follows in the dialect and this is why it's not incorrect. So that cancels out this error or this missed item. And I can go through that. I can do that in the self because in the self there's a lot of verbal responses that they have to give that you write down verbatim. So I can see what they said verbatim and compare it to what is a rule in the dialect and show them in the meeting, this is what I'm comparing it to. This is how it follows the rules. And this is why, even though it might be considered a missed item in the assessment, I know that it's not necessarily a missed item for the dialect that they speak. And it's not impacting their academics. It's not impacting their expressive or receptive language or anything like that. So for me, I just make sure, we always use evidence-based practice. I go into the meetings with evidence. I go into the meetings with this is the dialect they speak. This is what I'm comparing it to. And this is why this is not considered a disorder. It's just a dialectal difference. And so for that reason, they do not, they're not eligible for these services.
Okay, that's great. And do you have that reference, that resource that people can purchase or find? Is that, because what a valuable, you've done a lot of work for people.
Yes, I do. So there's two that I have I think it's on my website, on Etsy, on Teachers Pay Teachers. One is the AAE reference sheet where it has the language, morphology, and articulation differences, and it has some tips for a culturally responsive assessment. So it'll give you some information there as well. And then I also have a sheet of just phonological processes, just the regular ones, but it also has considerations for AAE. So next to cluster reduction, it'll have an asterisk and it'll tell you, this is a common characteristic of AAE. This is something to consider and look deeper into if you have a dialectal speaker that is producing the cluster reduction.